You're listening to Catalyst for Change, and my name is Jessica Huckabee, your host. I started this podcast to learn what makes people resilient after challenging events and how they've used those series of events as a catalyst for change in their life. You'll hear stories of resiliency and strength, so get ready, sit back, and be prepared to be inspired. Today, my guest is Dr. Ashley Wellman. She's a criminologist and has been a professor and scholar specializing in surviving trauma since 2008. Her research focuses on cold case homicide and sexual assault survivors. In 2018, her own life would be transformed after the traumatic and sudden loss of her husband. In an effort to create a magic and purposeful life for herself and her young daughter, Ashley Wellman is pursuing life as a creative writer with the release of her first children's book, The Girl Who Dances with Skeletons, My Friend Fresno. Thank you for coming on my podcast, Catalyst for Change, Stories of Resiliency. Dr. Wellman, can you tell me a little bit more about the work that you're doing with cold case survivors and a little bit more about your story that was a catalyst for change in your life?
Thank you so much for having me. I am so thankful for the professional work that I've been able to do. As a professor, one of our big responsibilities, of course, is research in the field. And as a criminologist, my passion became understanding the lived experiences of homicide survivors or the family who's left behind after a murder. Specifically, I've been able to connect with unsolved homicide survivors or cold case homicide survivors. And what's fascinating, one of the most amazing things that I've learned from this group is that they have witnessed or experienced the death of a loved one from a violent, sudden, tragic event, right? It's not cancer. It's not old age. It's not an accident. This is a purposeful killing of their loved one. And despite all of that, right? And as I hear their stories, there's so much hurt and lack of understanding of why and how this could have happened, and frustration with the justice system. But the underlying thing that all of these stories had in it was determination and hope and resiliency. And when you think about a murder, to think that a family could then do things like make differences in other people's lives, right? Establish a nonprofit to help other families pay for funeral expenses, or help families in a support group, right? These are people that are in the midst of their own heartbreak, their own horror, and yet they're there to help other people. So for me as a professional, it was such a blessing watching and working with these families, because they're the experts, right? I was supposed to be the scholarly expert. These families are the expert. And all I did was use my platform to share their beautiful stories and to try to seek resources and maybe changes in policy that could help them have a better experience right in the midst of this horrific event. And so what helped me as a professional, because this is a really heavy topic, was that I could go home at the end of the night and say, I don't know trauma like that. I don't know heartbreak, and I don't know what it's like to lose someone suddenly and in a violent manner, and to know that type of trauma. Well, all of that changed on August 12th, 2018, the day before I started a new job. So I'm bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I'm excited to bring my research to Texas, where I had just moved. I actually heard glass break downstairs, and I run downstairs and I see my husband lying in the middle of the hallway having a seizure. My 4-year-old was screaming for me to help save her dad. And I'm standing there with absolutely no idea what to do, right? It didn't seem real. And I'd call 911. I followed the ambulance to the emergency room, and at 4:30, about 90 minutes after the whole episode had started, the doctor screamed at me to stop. And she said, Ashley, if he wakes up, he's going to be brain dead. You need to stop begging for him to live.
Yeah.
And, here I am. I'm supposed to understand grief and trauma. But as it's happening to me, my entire world, Jessica, was obliterated, right? And I was absolutely lost. And here I am instantly becoming a widow, a single mother. And it was so real. And yet I didn't know what to do. And so ironically, as I'm stumbling through those first couple days, I kept going, what am I supposed to be doing? How am I supposed to do this? And I started going back to some of those tips and some of the lessons that I had learned from the survivors who had trusted me with their stories.
Wow. So their stories were able to help you through your grief, even though you lost your husband to a seizure, not a shooting or a violent attack. It's still, that pain is so real, and you were able to
Yeah.
draw on your research and your work with these amazing individuals and families.
It was wild. So I lost him to a pulmonary embolism. So the seizure was a result of him not being able to breathe from a pulmonary embolism. And you're right. So I always tell people, there is no grief that's the same. There's no prescription. Yeah. There's no way I can tell you, you're going to go through steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like, that's all horse crud. Yeah. And, as I was living this, I kept saying, like, okay, you've told people the following things. Like, as I was working with families, right, I told them things like, don't be afraid to get professional help, right? Because this is impossible to process by yourself. Any death is, but I had witnessed and held my husband, gasping for air, the fear in his eyes, right? It was just sudden. It was traumatic, and I witnessed it. So I kept going, okay, well, some of these families I had worked with had held their own family member, right, as they're struggling to fight for their life. And I thought, okay, I told them in that moment, that vision and that experience, right, is so visceral. And things like PTSD are very real. And so I had told them things like, go get professional counseling if you can, right? And if you're willing to open up to somebody, do things like EMDR therapy. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of that.
I've heard of that. Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. So
the eye movement rapid.
Stuff.
I've heard of that. Definitely.
Yes. I had recommended this because of the visions that are deeply ingrained in the, physiological problems that causes. So I immediately went and did that. And I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, right? I had just read the scholarship on saying that this is a very effective trauma processing method. So I did it, and it was amazing. And then I remember telling people, listen, your children understand grief, right? And we like to think that, oh, they're so young, they don't understand. But children have to be part of that process. So here I am, not knowing how to process my own grief, but I also realized I have a 4-year-old who needs me to process grief with her. So I said, okay, what have I told people? Let me go read one of my articles. And one of the things that I had really learned through my own research was that children get it. You have to be very honest with them, because making up stories about, daddy's sleeping or daddy's flying in the sky or these things. Yeah. I didn't want Reagan to think if she closed her eyes and went to sleep, she'd die too. So I had to be very honest in a 4-year-old's language with her. I had to protect her heart, get her help, right? If I was going to get myself help, she deserved help too. Yeah. And the other thing that was wild was I had learned the importance of grieving alone, but also grieving with your family. And some of the survivors I had worked with had said things like, I don't grieve with my daughters because I don't want them to see me hurting. I don't want to add to their burden, and I want to protect them from my emotions. But then I would talk to the daughter, and the daughter would say, I don't know that my dad cares. I don't think my dad is even affected by this. Yeah. And there was a shame in their own grief because they wanted to behave like dad or mom and say, it doesn't dictate my life. It doesn't dominate my life. When in reality, it was affecting their parents that way. Yeah. And so I really tried to be honest and transparent and let Reagan see, to an extent, right?
Extent. Yeah. Because they're still so small.
Yeah. To an extent, though, I wanted her to know it's okay to cry. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be heartbroken. And it's also okay to laugh and find moments of joy and to love life in the midst of trauma, right? That wasn't something to feel guilty about. It wasn't a slam or a shame or, forgetting her father. Yeah. Those different things. And so I'm grateful because 2 years later, we still have our moments, both of us. And there's such safety in knowing I can be authentic. And she knows that there's nothing shameful when she has her own emotional moments, that kind of take her off course and she needs someone to listen. She's established a safe place with me. Yeah.
So how were you able to explain that to someone who's 4 years old? I know it. I work in healthcare as well with trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so difficult to explain and to figure that all out.
What was crazy is that I really believed when I hugged her goodbye, and one of the people I knew here, we were brand new to the city. So I had called everyone that I knew, which was a total of 4 people,
Yeah.
and begged them to come get my daughter because the EMTs were saying like, you need to get her away from here.
Mm.
So someone had come to get her, and she said, okay, mommy, like she left, and I hugged this person. I said, I think he's dying, and they're like, no, he's not. No, he's not. So
Mm.
that, I sent her away with them, and I followed the ambulance to the emergency room. And in Reagan's mind, right, there's an ambulance, which means he's going to the doctor, and that means he's going to be okay, right? Because doctors fix us and doctors make us healthy.
Yeah.
And so I remember the person who was with me in the emergency room had texted this other individual that had Reagan, and they said,
Mm-hmm.
Buddy passed away. Don't say anything to Reagan. Did not want her to know from anyone but me.
Yeah.
And they went and brought her back to me. And I had actually, on the way home from the emergency room, right? I'm literally in an alternate universe. This is not real. That I had stopped at Barnes and Noble and gotten every grief book for a child that I could find, because I used to work there and I knew about this tiny section, very limited and needed, we need to grow this section for any authors out there. But
childhood grief.
Childhood grief, absolutely. So there's, 5 classic books you can run grab. So I did. And I check out, and the poor bookseller, I'm like, my husband just died right now.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm going to need every children's book. So God bless him. He gets me all these books. I check out and I get home, and Reagan comes through the door with a tiny figurine. And she says, Mommy, I brought Daddy a toy to make him feel better. And I thought, oh my God. And I said, come on, baby girl, we need to go upstairs and talk. And I told her, I said, hey, Reagan, you know how Daddy was sick, right? And she's like, yes. And she's like, but he went to the doctor. He's better, right? And I had to tell her very bluntly, no, baby, his body didn't make it. Daddy died. And I talked to her about his heart not working, and it was like a battery. Do you know what I mean? And when that doesn't work anymore, and she just started wailing and begging for her dad to come back. And I asked her, do you want to read about it? Do you want me to talk to you about it? And she told me no. And so I said, okay. And so I just sat there and held her while she cried. And it became something that was just this constant check-in of like, do you want to talk about it? No. Okay. Then we're not going to talk about it. Do you want to talk about it? Yes. Then we're going to talk about it. And she would ask very frank, bold questions that I did not know a 4-year-old could put their head around. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it would take my breath away. And then I would have to take a breath and think, okay, and let me articulate this in a way that's compassionate and honest. And things even like she did not, I still go back and forth of like, shouldn't I have? And I just stopped doing that. But like she didn't see her dad before he got cremated. To me, it didn't make sense at the time.
Yeah.
She was 4. And so, she was asking like, where's his body? And so eventually I had the ashes of his body. And I said, well, in America, because cultures do it very differently, right? In America, usually 2 things happen. You might want to bury your loved one, right? So that there is a place that you can go and their body is safe and that it's there and you can check, you can go there. Or, and then I'm like, how do you explain cremation to a 4-year-old? Do you know what I mean? I'm like, ugh. So like for me, I had nightmares about what actually happens, so I'm like, let's not expose her to that. But I said, or other people choose to turn their loved one into magical dust, right? Yeah. That they can keep and or spread around the world to spread the magic of their loved one, right? And keep them everywhere around them because they get to be returned to the earth and the world, right?
Yeah.
And so she's like, can I see it? And I went, oh my God. So I was like, sure, I can see it, right? So I showed it to her and she was like, so that's Daddy? I was like, yeah, it's magical dust, right? It was a machine that turned him into magical dust because that's a lot kinder.
Yeah. Yeah,
And,
exactly.
And she was like, oh, okay. And then she's like, put it away. I don't want to. And I was like, okay, perfect. So, there's those things. Even now, like the only thing we had not talked about as a family, he was only 44. I was 34 and Reagan was 4 when he died.
Oh my
so
God. Yeah.
Because of what I had studied, we had talked a lot about what do I want at the end of my life,
Mm-hmm.
And I would come home and be like, oh my God, I just met with this 22-year-old widow, or I just met with this mom who just lost her, 16-year-old son. Like, So we would talk about what do we want?
Yep.
And he had said, please, like, don't let me be brain dead. So that was, please don't let me be paralyzed or on a ventilator. So I knew that. And I knew he wanted to be cremated. And I knew all of these things except for what was I supposed to do with his ashes,
Yeah.
And so I still have them. And it was one of these things that I was like, wait, I'm at the point now where I'm like, I would love to do what I told Reagan you need to do, like return him to the magic of the world. Right.
Yeah.
Corona, of course, popped up when I got this bravery to say I'm ready to do that. But
Okay.
my heart says take him back to where we met and fell in love, and where he had his dream job, where he met his girl. Do you know what I mean? Like where all this stuff happened. So that's the plan. And I want to save a little bit of it to make into a necklace for Reagan for her wedding. She can pin it inside her dress, whatever.
Yeah.
And then that's enough. Do you know what I mean? Like she doesn't need that burden, I don't think, of what should she do with her father's ashes? God forbid something happens to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's bizarre, the things now that I have to think about for a little one, and what all of those realities mean.
And how is she growing now? She's 6 now. And so what's her understanding now? And what's been the process of you both getting, working through this together? Is it bringing you closer? And how,
Oh my God,
does that look
yes.
like?
Oh my God, yes. She's the light of my world, and I'd like to think I'm the light of hers, even on bad days.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyone who has a little girl who's 5 or 6, they're getting feisty and sassy, and they're like 25 in a little girl's body. But she's wonderful. She's brilliant. One of the things that I think is a blessing is that we do have each other, and there is that honest reflexiveness with us. She's in performing art. She loves performing arts. So theater and music and dance. And I think that that's been a savior for us because that's our thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Buddy used to laugh and say, oh my God, if she's going to be in theater, like we got to get her voice lessons because she's like tone deaf, but we're both performers. She and I are both performers. We love, to make people laugh and to be silly and expressive and artistic. And so when he passed away, that was one of the things that I said, well, that's something that we love. And could I use that as a form of healing for us? And so ironically, the promise that Buddy and I had made to each other was we moved to the city that we moved to because of this fine arts school that was audition based that little 4-year-olds could audition for elementary school.
Wow.
And so months after he died, I'm at every parents meeting, I'm at every theater workshop, everything else. And Reagan is loving it. It really was a way for her to express herself, good, bad, ugly, and beautiful, right? To express her emotions through something other than just talking about them. And so she could sing, or she would like literally write little songs to herself or paint, and all of these things that would allow her to express her emotions. And in the same time, I'm grateful for literally one of the dearest humans in my life. Right after Buddy passed away, he saw a picture of Reagan dancing with her best friend, Fresno, who's a posable skeleton.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm a criminologist. I had bought this skeleton when she was 2 to put in my office.
Yeah.
And she named it, which meant I was in trouble because I had to keep it like a dog, right? So she had named it and she said, you can't take him to the office. This is my best friend, Fresno. And so at the time, my husband and I are laughing like, how weird, but we're going to rock and roll with it. So let her have this friend. Well, Fresno's still a best friend. And he has, he naps and takes baths and travels and, goes to the theater with us, all kinds of different things. So poor people in Fort Worth are always like, oh, here comes Fresno, right? He's always with us.
He's a famous skeleton.
Oh, he is. And so he saw this picture of her. And while I'm using art and music and, dance and stuff to help Reagan heal, he said, what if you started writing creatively? What if you took a break or at least balanced the heaviness that you do with sexual assault survivors, homicide survivors, right? All of the victimization. Yeah. And what if you started expressing yourself creatively, like write about Fresno and Reagan? Because look at the horror that should exist between a little girl and this skeleton. And yet Reagan sees nothing but beauty and friendship and this like just unapologetic love for this skeleton. And he's like, that should be inspirational to you as is. Write a story about their friendship. And so I did. I started in 2008. It's 2020 now, and you're about to be able to get your hands on this book. But I started this children's book, The Girl Who Dances with Skeletons, My Friend Fresno. And in that, I started to feel alive again. It's weird how art did that for me, right? It allowed me to see colors. It allowed me to feel, just alive. And it was, again, I said, oh my gosh, why didn't I think of this? This is what I told, and tell survivors, is that you've been through trauma. There's no way to be the exact same person that you were, right? And there's no way to live the exact same life you had, as deeply as we crave that. Yeah. And so I would tell them, don't be afraid to learn something new. Don't be afraid to establish a new tradition, right? Don't be afraid to say, I used to be this and now I am this, right? And embrace the season of change, as ugly and as not wanted as it was, right?
Yeah.
What can we do with that new season? And so in this moment, I'm like, okay, yes, my world is crumbling around me. But what if I started to do exactly what I had promised my husband as I kissed him goodbye, which was make a magical life for my daughter, right? Yeah. What if I made a magical life for both of us by giving myself permission to say it's okay to change, it's okay to pursue something new, and it's okay to celebrate a new love, right, of whatever it is in your life, even though you're hurting, right? And even though you feel broken, use that to take time to explore something new. And I'm so grateful that this friend suggested that, because, that was the first project I started working on creatively. And it has been the constant on bad days. My creativity and the creative writing has really been that constant to say, you're going to be okay, right? You can create whatever you want. And that means also a future that you want, right? By trusting that change has happened and you get to be the driver in where that change directs you.
Yeah, that is amazing. Your story of just your healing through that process, along with your daughter, and her being able to express herself through arts and performance, and through her relationship with Fresno, the skeleton. Yes. That is amazing.
And she's been, and what the cool thing is I've included her in that business process, right? So this had been a way for me to heal. And then, I realized that when I went back to work, my work environment, as much as that was supposed to be my safety net and that was supposed to be my area of comfort, the people and my place in it had changed, right? Very dramatically because of grief. And I experienced some heartbreak at work. And it was, I stepped back and I said, what if what I'm doing to heal and to survive this trauma, what if it could actually be a way for me to thrive? And I started saying, this is not going to be fun. I'm going to make this fun and my business, right? Yeah. And I started bringing Reagan into it and saying, like, all right, Reagan, help me out, man. I need this, and she started helping me craft the story, fine tune the story. I partnered with the brilliant artist, Zachary Thomas Kincaid. And he told me, Ashley, I'm an artist. I'm not an illustrator. And I said, I know. So he brought Fresno to life in these pages, literally through art. It's beautiful. And Reagan's been the one who has been the best little marketer and chief creative officer and these different things, because everywhere we go, she wants people to know Fresno. She wants people to know that she's a character in a book, and that, she even goes to the extreme of being like, hey, my mom wrote this book, you should buy it. And I'm like, Reagan,
that's so cool.
Like, oh
yeah.
God.
What a gift to give her, to include her in like your business process.
It's cool,
and give her ownership.
And she sees the good and the bad. And so she gets to see that life is not perfect, right? Because I think our kids, we do try to protect them and say like, oh, life is perfect. But what that does is it puts pressure on them that they also should not struggle. And that when they do, there's something wrong. And so I like when she sees, the struggles, the stress, the worry. And she's grown so empathetic and so compassionate, not only because of my husband's death and her dad's death, but because of the fact that I've let her see the good, the bad, the ugly. And I've let her see that there's beauty in pain, that there's, good that comes from the bad. And she's learning, like with other people in class, she'll say, it's okay that you're having a hard time, or it's okay that your feelings are hurt. Like, we're going to be okay. They didn't mean to hurt your feelings. So she tries so hard to explain that it's okay that something bad happened.
Yeah.
And then she tries to paint it in this really beautiful light, because she's danced that with me. Like we've done that together of, this is not good. You can see this, but then watch what we're going to do to make it good. Right. And that back and forth, I think, has been a really fun dance for us to do together.
Yeah, that is really neat. So she took the image, the skeleton, which represents death or criminology or, something tragic that could have happened. And she, basically made it into this beautiful thing.
Yes.
And is helping others at school by saying, you know what, this is normal to feel some kind of adversity or some kind of pain. And so she's paying that forward by helping others. And you are too. And how has this changed your work with survivors of cold cases?
I think it's empowered it. Yeah, I think it's empowered it. It is, totally transparent. It's been harder to do this work now that I know heartbreak and trauma, different kinds, right? But the same, at the end of the day, we're all humans. And that same just shattering of my world, I think, has made it so close to my survivors. It makes me a better researcher, but it also makes my heart a little bit more vulnerable. So I'm grateful for the balance now, that that's not the only thing, right? I used to really define myself that is who I am, and that's my worth and value. And I think there's been beauty in being able to, I will forever be an advocate, and I will forever fight for survivors around me, right? But to be able to step back a tiny bit and say, that's not all you are, Ashley. You're also an author, and you're also, for me, it said, all the beautiful things that I got to do with my survivors doesn't have to stop, with the research. What if I, like Reagan does, what if my friend Fresno becomes a vessel to share the realities that, yes, we're all different. Yes, we all experience things that are scary, but our differences make us special. We are better together. And that one of the lines in the book is that, she says, I used to be scared of monsters under my bed, but now I welcome them, because I've learned things that are scary are often just misunderstood. Right.
I love that.
I love that. Thank you. Because the reality is that as human beings, I think we crave things that are like us because they feel safe. And how fun is that? Right. Like, that's not what makes life beautiful. What's beautiful is when we take things that might scare us. And for adults, right, it's become things like religion and politics and race and, different SES and all of these other things, sexual identities, and saying, look, there's actually so much beauty when you take a moment to look at something that might, quote, scare you or you don't understand. And as you peel back the layers and you realize the humanity and the love and the, just differences that exist between you and someone else, that's beautiful. And so, these things that scare us, they're often just misunderstood. And then for Reagan, it's take my best friend, his name's Fresno and he's a skeleton. So,
That's so cool.
For her, it's through Fresno that we're able to share that message. But to me, as I read this children's book to myself, it is the lessons of something that should be scary, like death or like differences, those types of things. They're not, once we understand, right, that yes, death might be tragic, but that also means there was a life. And it also means there was a chapter that we got with Buddy, right? My husband. And so in the midst of looking at this symbol of death, there's also life there. And Reagan celebrates the life that Fresno brings, right? And for those adults reading it, it's kind of that reminder of, oh, you're right? It doesn't have to be scary. Life doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't always have to be bad and dark, because that skeleton we look at as dark and scary, but it doesn't have to be. It could also symbolize hope and life and legacy and all of these really big things that are joyful.
Yep. Well, thank you so much. That is such a powerful story. And I know it's going to help people that are working through grief and surviving difficult times right now.
Oh, thank you. If they're interested, if any of your listeners are interested, they can jump on and play and shop with My Friend Fresno. They'll just go to www.myfriendfresno.com and they can snag that first book in the series and a lot of the other playful things that we have to offer with Fresno.
And I'm definitely going to buy that book for my 2.5-year-old. So, because someday she'll be able to read that book.
She will love it. There's even a little plush doll she can snuggle with too. So it's
nice.
So fun. Oh, I cannot wait.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jessica.
Okay. You've been listening to Catalyst for Change, and my name is Jessica Huckabee, your host. Join us next week for another story of resiliency. And please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and feel free to leave me a comment or email me at catalystforchange20@gmail.com, or on Facebook, we have a page at Catalyst for Change Resiliency.